Hello and welcome to the Relax It's Retirement podcast with your host, Josh Leonard, where we talk about transitioning into retirement with intent. I'm Wendy McConnell. Josh, we have too much fun on this podcast. We really do.
We do. But it probably makes it better for listeners. At least I think so. So
Yes. One day we'll have to record what goes on in the green room
yeah,
before the
yeah.
recording actually
We
starts.
we did have an editing scare where we had a little bit of this in
Oh,
a proof, and I was like, not quite comfortable sending that one out. But we could do a behind the scenes at some point.
I
I
think
think that would be entertaining.
that would be very enjoyable. Okay, so we have Pete Belcastro back with us forever
Thank you.
for all time now.
Yes,
I-
Wendy, and you did well with the last name there.
Thank you. Yeah, I just you told me just read it and I can do that.
Nice. It
All right,
is.
guys.
It's
So what
nice
is
to be
on-
part of the group now. You know,
Gotcha.
There's
It's
a lot
official.
of fun that
Pete,
happens.
yeah.
Thank you.
We got you in.
Yes.
We got you in.
Nice.
You're in the circle of trust.
There you
That's
go.
right.
Awesome.
That's right. And don't violate that circle. All right,
No.
guys, what have we got on the agenda for today?
Yeah, so I think a common question that we field is, am I ready to retire? And how much money do I actually need to retire? So there's all sorts of benchmarks out there. And just like anything, it's always hard to tell when you're ready. So today we thought we'd provide some framework and some points for you to understand to better know if you are ready to retire.
All right. Am I ready to retire?
No, we still need you to co-host and be a part of this banter for a while. So the answer is no, and that's the end of this episode.
Oh, shucks. All right.
Seriously,
Let me just
though.
check the. We'll check the menu on Wendy here. It's like, all right, when's she going to retire? No,
Yeah.
it doesn't exist, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I think that's always everybody's number one concern is, am I going to have enough money? Will I run out of money? Like, what if I end up living to 103?
Sure. And I think, recently we've been thinking about inflation more as well, right? Inflation was kind of forgot about, but there's always a cast of needs and concerns that bubbles up and down based on our life experiences and outside conditions. But I'd say the first one is just understanding your retirement needs. And I think that starts by just defining what you need today, knowing your expenses and your expectations for retirement. It can be as simple as, do you still have a mortgage? What's that mortgage payment? Any car payments? What do you normally spend on going out to eat, eating at home, any clothing, lifestyle needs, any of those basic expenses? So while a budget isn't the most exciting thing, we do need to have a good grasp of what we actually need to do any sort of retirement projections.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
we
think
also have to keep in mind that, what we want to do. Like, are you going to go to happy hour every single day now that you're retired? That could be pricey.
And that could play into longevity then too, Wendy. So
that could be a retirement plan.
Okay. All right.
but I think, that's it. So you bring up your lifestyle. We often say to clients, once you do retire, every day's Saturday. So where do you typically spend the most money? Well, it's Saturday, right? Because you go out to the store, you're buying, maybe it's grocery shopping. You go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy all those things you're going to fix at the house too, right? So it's our day when we spend a lot more. And when you have a lot more time, sometimes that day comes up a lot more frequently.
Yeah, when you start looking at people in retirement, obviously we know expenses are going to change. You go from commuting into work or buying lunch or having to buy maybe new work clothes that you necessarily don't like or aren't going to wear too often. So oftentimes when people start putting together a budget, they're like, well, this isn't going to be what I'm going to be in retirement. But what we do see is that helps out greatly because all those things that you usually cut out, that don't make sense. Like Josh said here, you start spending money on other things because yes, you have a little bit more time. And I mean, I used to have a coworker that would say, why would I take off and go on vacation? I just end up spending more money. So I'd rather be just working. I know that I'm never I'm just making money when I'm working. I'm never spending it, and obviously he was a very lonely guy, and
I was
after
gonna
about
say.
3-4 marriages, yeah, it probably it might not be the best philosophy, but but I think that is important to realize that we know that expenses change, but establishing that budget, knowing what you have and what you need today does help in the future, even when your expenses change.
Yeah, and I think, many times we'll hear from folks like, "Oh, if I'm not commuting to work anymore, my gas prices will go down. I'm not spending as much in gas, or I go out to lunch a lot at work." But let's think through what retirement looks like for you. If you're going to play golf 4 days a week, you're going to be driving to the golf course. How far away is the golf course? Are you going to the same one, or are you going to a different one? Are you going to go out to lunch after that round of golf with the buddies you went? Maybe it's not that much different. And if you're golfing that much, you probably need to spend money on all sorts of other equipment and endless tools as well. So it might actually be more expensive. So trying to get a grasp on what your lifestyle will look like then. That being said, we have clients that golf all throughout the winter in Pittsburgh, and they are very much budget golfers. In fact, he's turned it into a side business where while they're golfing, they collect all those golf balls that people like me hit all over the course. He collects them, cleans them up, and resells them. So, we got to balance that out, but understanding what your retirement needs are. For some people, that sounds like a horrible thing to do. I would never want to clean golf balls and try to resell them. That sounds awful. For other folks, hey, it's a way to make this hobby that I really want to do extremely affordable.
Yeah, big difference between joining a country club and, cleaning golf balls as you go.
Yeah. Yep. But I think, we need to look at our fixed versus variable expenses as well, right? So that playing golf, just sticking with that thread, if we're doing it 3 times a week, that's a lot more expensive than 3 times a month, right? So that could be a variable expense. In winter, most folks in this region of the country aren't golfing as much. It's cold. So they don't want to be outside. So that might go down in the winter months, but maybe you're spending more on travel at that point. I think the other conversation we have with folks is if they are going to fully retire. For many folks, they'll say, "Oh, I'm just always going to work because I like my work. And I'm kind of at the point where I get paid quite well to do my work and it doesn't stress me out that much." Well, then we need to set a line of what we would call work optional versus fully retired, where we look at that lifestyle and, well, what if something changes at work? What if you get a new boss and you don't like the boss? Knowing that you can leave at any time is quite helpful, and having the framework to be able to quickly make that decision gives us a lot of peace of mind as well.
Yeah, that's one of the favorite things to tell people is, hey, you're in good shape. Right now, your plan looks awesome. As long as your lifestyle stays the same, you could kick off the work boots yesterday, and start doing what you want. And that's a powerful thing to tell somebody that, hey, you're work optional from now on for the rest of your life. Something happens, you just decide to, hey, I have a hobby that's going to take all my time now, or like you said, something negative happens at work, or maybe it's something positive. You find another passion. You're like, you know what, I'm going to go do that now with my time. It's it's an awesome place to be, especially from a planner's perspective when we get to relay that message to a client.
Yeah, certainly so. So, Pete, let's dig into the second part where we talk about some of the metrics or things to get a good gauge on, do we have enough money? So I think the one that comes to mind that we've talked about several times, we've made videos referring to it as well, is the 4% rule. So Pete, what is the 4% rule?
It's if you've sat down with any sort of planning or even done some research, you probably come across this 4% rule. It's it stemmed from a study from back in the early 90s, and it has been attested and back tested, and really it's designed to say that, hey, you're never going to run out of money in retirement if you take 4% of the money. Obviously, that's a big blanket statement, and we're all individuals, so it's hard to it's hard to put that kind of role on every single one of us. So I like to kind of break it down just to show what that really means. It's pretty much, if you take 4%, they're saying that your money in most portfolios could last about 35 years. Okay, so in retirement, let's just do the math here. Most people are retiring, hey, 65, maybe 70 now, so all right, we get it. 95, that gets us close to what we all think maybe well above life expectancy, let's just say. If you move that 4% one way or the other, it changes that. So let's just say if you assume a 5% rule, well, we think your money's we can back test it, and pretty much with a good amount of certainty that your money's going to last about 20 years. Okay. In the same respect, if you took 6%, we would safely say your money is going to last about 10 years. On the flip side, if you took 3% of your money, we can readily expect your money to last about 50 years. So I said a lot of numbers there about that 4%, Wendy, but I think that it's important to just show people that this is, it's just kind of a little guide that we use to say, everything being equal, chances are that your money will not run out in retirement if you take 4%.
Yeah, and I think to flesh that out a little bit more, because a withdrawal rate is something that is easily understood to financial people like us. But really what we're talking about, if it's $1 million portfolio, they're saying a 4% distribution of that $1 million would be $40,000 a year, right? So, hey, we can sustainably take $40,000 adjusted for inflation throughout retirement and shouldn't run out of money. I believe the initial study had the portfolio about 60% invested in stocks and 40% in bonds. So that's another factor, right? How you're actually invested makes quite a bit of difference too. If all your money's under the mattress, well, you're not going to earn anything. So 4%, well, that's a pretty linear path there. We can figure that out quite easily. I think in working with clients, if your plan is to go to the bar every day, Wendy, in retirement, then we might not be worried about making it 30 plus years in retirement, right? It might only be 10.
I might just have one or two. I mean, you guys are assuming that, I'm just, going all out.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, there are those sensational stories on the news every once in a while that someone lived to, 100, 105, and their secret is drinking Dr. Pepper or eating bacon every day,
Yeah.
Right.
So it could be 2 drinks at the local watering hole.
Dirty martini. There you go.
There you go. It's because you're hitting multiple food groups there, Wendy.
Exactly. Okay, so we're assuming though that our money is going to continue to grow as we take out a percentage each year.
Well, it's going to have fluctuations. So over the long term, it's growing. But one of the biggest risks that we have in retirement is our sequence. So if you retire and it happens to be 2008 and the stock market drops 40% and you're 100% in stocks, you're probably not going to want to take much money out. Right? So we need to be careful there and have an appropriate allocation. So the 4% rule addresses that by saying, hey, even with the market ups and downs, this is an appropriate amount of money you should be taking out. There are some alternatives to this 4% rule that have come up. One of the ones that I keep running into more is what's called the guardrails approach, where we say, hey, we can take a little bit more out initially, but if the market takes a big dive, like in 2008, we're going to adjust our lifestyle accordingly. So we're going to take a little bit out when the market has very extreme behavior. If it swings the other way, so if we have very high growth, well, we can also adjust up our lifestyle a little bit more.
Yeah, that's when it's important to go back to what we talked about just previously about that budgeting. And if you have these fixed, you have these variable expenses already laid out, you can find a good way to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to take that trip to Florida, maybe, from us here in Pittsburgh, maybe we're going to Ocean City instead. We're going to drive instead of fly, but take a look at those variable expenses. But that's, once you have those things laid out, it makes it a lot easier. So that's another nice, and hopefully these things are making sense. It's like, okay, hey, if you take more out, your portfolio is not going to last as long. Hey, if things are doing well, you can spend more. If things are going, a little bit pulling back, you got to spend less. But it does take discipline, and having that budget laid out helps with that.
And I think for our clients, we've talked about it before, but we take a 3-bucket approach where we want to have the cash for those emergency needs set aside, right? We're not worried about what's happening in the market there. 3 to 6 months worth of expenses set aside. If you're buying a car in 3 months, you should have that down payment, or if you're paying cash, keep it all in cash over that time period. Then our next bucket, our income bucket, is 6 to 10 years worth of income in pretty safe, stable stuff. So if the stock market's up and down, you're not worried about that in the short term, right? You know you have a 6 to 10 year runway. And then our final bucket, our growth bucket, we're going to take risk. It's going to go up and down, but over the long term, it helps pour down to the other two buckets. We've found that a lot of clients find comfort in that, knowing when the market goes down, hey, I got my income set aside for the next 6 to 10 years, so I can be patient here. I think the academic studies, like the 4% rule, are a little bit more for guys like Pete and I, for the financial advisors, to understand and get, some baseline knowledge to project in the future. But really, for the average retiree that's seeking financial advice, some of that gets a little bit too muted. And if you say, oh, you got a 98% chance, well, when the market's really bad, they might be hung up on that 2% failure rate.
Yeah.
So we like to kind of balance that out a little bit with human behavior.
Yeah, breaking it down, not only does it help, you can compartmentalize that a little bit easier whenever you're in that distribution side of life and you're not accumulating things, and inevitably the market does go down. It allows you to say, hey, that's my growth bucket, that's what it's supposed to do. And like we said, if you already had that income set aside, and it's good, it allows you to just stick to that plan that you have in place. It doesn't allow you to panic.
Yeah. And, I think having a proper plan where you're constantly updating and making those long-term projections helps a little bit more than 4%.
Yes.
For clients, when they meet with us, we can say, hey, based on the track record you're on now, we're assuming your funds are going to last to this age, and being able to update that regularly. Or if the market takes a dive and they're feeling insecure about it, we can update the plan and show them, hey, you know what? You're still in really good shape over the long term, or maybe we need to make some adjustments there. That ongoing conversation is really where we find the most value. But to bring us to our next area, your sources of retirement income can make all the difference here. If you are one of the few people fortunate enough to have Social Security and a pension that's covering most of your expenses, this whole 4% rule, guardrails, 3 buckets, doesn't really matter quite as much. So, Pete, what are some of the tips or areas of stable income that you see frequently?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the news, I think recently we've been hearing about Social Security running out, and this and that. But that is one of the places that is still an important piece of financial planning. I mean, looking at that, your Social Security, that's kind of like the foundation there. Whenever we start looking at things, but it's being doing projections longer and longer, we're having to rely more and more on people's individual investments, and actually, looking at maybe having something that is going to create an income in retirement that is an appreciative asset.
Yeah, so I think a common one that comes to mind, or that we see people, is rental income as well. So maybe you have a house that you're looking to move out of. Maybe you can rent it rather than selling it, especially if that home's paid off, and that income source might be beneficial to you throughout retirement. And, get some good renters in there, and hey, they're going to pay you to continue to own that asset. So that can be, while not guaranteed, it can be a decent source of stable income in retirement, in addition to your Social Security and pension, if you're lucky enough to have one.
Yeah, and you find maybe there's a passion of yours, and that passion can generate just enough income, maybe to do what you want, maybe that fun money, maybe that going out to eat money, not having to, even though you are retired, doing something that you love might be able to relieve some of that pressure that you might see from rising costs or changing lifestyles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that rental income too. We have one client that sold their house that they kind of raised their family in, bought the new patio home that was more accessible to, retire in. And at the time, interest rates were low. So they rented out the property, and the rent was enough to pay the mortgage on the new house. Right. So they're just kind of trading dollars there. Right. They were able to move into a more suitable home, but still have the other asset, which provides flexibility in the future. I think one of the nice things about rental income is it does help keep up with inflation over time. Many pensions don't increase with inflation over time. So when we're projecting a retirement plan, while your Social Security or pension, whatever your income sources might be enough initially, in 10 years from now with inflation, they're probably not going to be enough. So we need something to adjust with inflation. Social Security does have a cost of living adjustment. We are a little bit more cautious on that. Although it's been high with inflation high, the cost of Medicare also goes up. And once you start claiming Social Security, that Medicare expense comes out of your check. So for many folks, the check's not really going up by that much over time. So we want to be careful with inflation there and make sure that we have kind of something to help supplement income in the long term.
Yeah, it's something that's real. Now, nowadays, obviously we see it everywhere. It seems like every time you turn around, something costs a little bit more than it did. And it's something that we do plan for, but it is tough whenever you tell somebody, hey, you got a decent raise, but 8% in Social Security, and like I saw no difference. My Medicare went up 10%. So it is, it's an interesting game to play, and I mean, we try and use. You can go back to was it like 1912? I think is when our the inflation numbers that we utilize, we start aggregating. So so that rate, I mean, the average rate of inflation gets close to 3%, a little bit less, year over year, but it does seem like if you've been around lately, that number is low.
Yeah, the last few years it's been really high. The decade before that, not quite as high. So we need to build that in the plan. We need to assume that there's going to be some inflation. Certainly, much like that market risk, if it's really high early in retirement, that could be a problem for you. But, we touched on Medicare. I think another thing to plan for is just healthcare, long-term care costs, right? This is another thing as you're preparing for retirement to think through. I pulled a stat for our Pittsburgh office. If you live in the same zip code, 15237, as our Pittsburgh office, the cost of a nursing home private room per month currently, according to Genworth, is $10,950. If you come out here to the sandy shores of Lake Michigan and St. Joseph, Michigan, it's actually higher. It's $11,254 a month.
Oh my.
Yeah. So we need to plan for that, right? In our last episode, we talked about how you can utilize life insurance to help hedge against some of these costs. Another plan is to spend down assets. So shield the assets that you want to retain by using trusts or other planning tools, and then spend down those assets. According to Fidelity, the average retiree, just for total healthcare cost, single person is going to spend $157,500. If you're married, that's about $315,000. Most folks don't just have an extra $300,000 laying around to cover health expenses. So let's make sure as we're transitioning into retirement, we have proper health planning in place to help hedge those costs as much as possible.
Yeah, that's something that definitely doesn't get cheaper as we get older. Obviously whenever you're younger and you say, hey, I want to pay for long-term care insurance, like, absolutely. That's, on average, people don't use this till you're 80, you're 40, you're fine. But as you get older and obviously I think this is logical as well, those things become more and more expensive. And you're talking about paying for something, what do most people need long-term care for? It's a variety of things, and kind of on the extreme is, let's just say you have like an Alzheimer's disease or something that's mentally degrading you, that those people can be on long-term care for years because you're physically okay, your body's not giving up. But unfortunately, and I think that, I mean, looking at myself, I think that's one of the worst things that, I think that when we do have clients going through that, that is one of the most challenging things. I think people would much rather lose mobility than lose their mind. But in any case, that, so you have one extreme, then the other extreme here. Let's just say that you have somebody that's body is failing, and they have underlying health issues that are really affecting them physically. They're not going to be on long-term care as long, because once they go down, usually it doesn't take too long for for us to pass away. Let's just be honest. That's kind of what long-term care does, is it provides that cost until the end. So it's important to be aware of these numbers, that we get this average number of like 1 year, 2 years, and you realize that, wow, it's made up of a lot of extremes of people that are on it for a long time, and people on it for maybe even just days or months, compared to that. So you can get an idea on yourself, with family medical history, and things like that, that if you really see something within your parents or other family members that say, hey, I got this mental issue that Alzheimer's runs in our family, I might need care for a while, I'm going to start looking at this long-term care now, and at least putting that in part of my plan, so that you make sure that, hey, I can shield those assets, that I'm not I think that's one thing that's scary to me. I'm I don't know where I am or who I am, and all my money's going to that, and I'd rather that go to my family. So it's part of that planning, that we can at least try and get into that insurance or get into that coverage whenever it is a little bit cheaper earlier in life, or
Yeah,
earlier in
certainly. And
retirement. Yeah.
we've talked on the show before about utilizing things like HSA accounts too, to kind of save your own bucket of money there. I think traditional long-term care insurance to me is a little spooky, because if you don't use it, you just paid a whole lot of money for nothing. So, we want to be careful there, but talking through with a financial advisor these risks is critically important in order to see if you are, in fact, prepared to retire. I think the last area that I wanted to touch on before we wrap up is just making sure that we have that emergency fund, or what we call your cash bucket, right? So we talked about the long-term care risk, which is crazy expensive and, a harder risk to manage. But many times people run into issues with simple home repairs, right? The water heater goes, the roof starts leaking, and the car breaks down at the same time. And all of a sudden, you have a $10,000 credit card bill at 20% interest that keeps compounding. And you know what? We're following this 4% rule. We're taking this exact amount out, and we can't ever pay this off, right? So we don't want to get derailed by these risks that really happen throughout our lives, right? We've all been in the unfortunate situation where we had a surprise expense, right? You go to start the car in a cold winter morning and it doesn't start.
Mm-mm.
And then you take it to the mechanic and, well, it's going to cost blank amount, right? So let's build in that buffer to make sure that, it doesn't derail our retirement plan.
Yeah, you can have buckets within your buckets. So even though
Yeah.
you have this emergency fund bucket, we can have that separated into, hey, this is for my long-term kind of healthcare. I want to make sure I have this. This is for these household expenses. This is just to cover all my bills. So you can separate that further, and that just makes it more and more easier, and more and more of a peace of mind.
Yeah, I think segregating accounts for specific purposes is always helpful for us. I think one of the conversations we'd had sort of endlessly with clients, since interest rates have went higher too, is make sure you have a high yield or a good yielding savings account or money market for that emergency fund. A lot of them are 4 to 5% these days. So if you're not earning that money on the money that is just meant to sit there and stay safe, let's do that. For many folks, if that balance is big enough, that could mean an additional vacation just in interest. So that's like about the easiest move. You don't have to take any risk to do it. So it's something I feel like we're constantly talking to folks about. But
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't want you digging up cans in the backyard trying to find money to pay off a medical bill or or something like that.
yeah, or waiting. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's why we typically root back to this 3 bucket approach too. So within that cash, hey, we have enough to cover some of these incidentals as well. The income bucket, we're covering, including average inflation, your expenses over the next 6 to 10 years. And then we're going to grow the money as much as we can on the other side within reasonable, prudent investment management to help replace that and help mitigate these risks as much as possible over time. We talked about long-term care, of course, our different sources of income. By throwing those all together into a plan and looking at it from a 30,000-foot view, most folks find a lot more comfort knowing exactly where they stand. As we talk through and say, hey, you need to be concerned about this, that, and the other, many times it just becomes too big of a task to bear. So working with a financial advisor, like the Leonard Advisory Group, Peter or I, or Angela on our team, or another advisor can help give you a better view of where you stand within your plan. So for anyone listening today that we raised more questions than we answered, feel free to schedule a 15-minute call with myself or Pete, and we can answer any questions that you have or help you mitigate some of those risks that we talked about. If it seems like we might be a good fit, we can build out that plan for you to give you that 30,000-foot view. We have some additional resources available too in terms of planning for your retirement income. We'll have a couple links to our YouTube channel where we talk through things like average retirement savings and how you stack up. Throughout that 10-minute video, we cover some of these subjects and provide some visual illustrations for you as well to learn a little bit more if, in fact, you are prepared to retire. So for all of you listening today, I encourage you to get that plan in place, update it, make sure that you're in good shape, and we're happy to help. Until next time, thanks for listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share with your friends.